It just dawned on me, and I'll have to talk to Steve Forbes about this. He actually sits on our board of directors. It just dawned on me that Steve Jobs was actually fired from Apple. So I better watch my back. I guess there was confusion because I thought we were getting together today. How many people were here yesterday? I apologize for that. I blame the government. Whenever things go wrong, I blame the government. 99% of the time when you blame the government, it turns out after the fact that it was true. I want to tell a story today and talk a little bit about what we're doing as a community, what you guys are doing, what Heartland's doing, what FreedomWorks is doing. But I want to go back to when I was 13 years old. And I'm looking at your bookshelves here, Joe, and I suspect this is a lot of your library sitting on these shelves. And when I was 13 years old, I was not a normal child. And I used to read. And some day that year of my life, I happened to stumble across an album by the band called Rush. Does anyone know the band Rush? Oh, yeah. A large contingent here. Well, I bought this album called 2112. And you guys that remember this, if you're old enough to remember the ritual of peeling the plastic off of the vinyl album, and you would sit there and you would read the liner notes while you were listening to the music. And I'm reading the liner notes, and by the way, it's an awesome album, and I just thought it was just a fabulous thing. On the bottom there it says, dedicated to the genius of Ayn Rand. I'm 13 years old. Who is Ayn Rand? I have no idea, but it's an interesting name. It sticks in the back of my mind, but I'm also reading the lyrics about this dystopian future where these tyrannical leaders steal all of the individualism from this guy that discovers a guitar and wants to do something better, wants to create something that no one's created before. And they literally crush it, and they crush him in the process. About 6 months later, I was at a used garage sale, and I see this really shaggy copy of a book called Anthem, written by Ayn Rand. I'm like, that's that person. I didn't even know if it was a guy or a girl at this point. But I pick up this book, I take it home, I devour it. Has anyone ever read Anthem? It's an amazing book, and if you haven't read it, you should read it today. It's going to creep you out a little bit because it's a lot like Atlas Shrugged in the sense that you resemble what's going on in that story. I devour this book. I'm like, okay, I get this. I now understand some of the things that I've been wrestling with in my adolescent mind about how the world works. In this really old copy of Anthem, it says other books by Ayn Rand. Atlas Shrugged didn't exist at the time that this old copy of Anthem was printed. So I went out and tried to find a copy of The Fountainhead instead. I had to hassle my mom again and again and again to get her to take me to every bookstore that I could find. You know how hard it was to find a book when I was 14 years old? Virtually impossible, particularly a book about liberty, particularly a book by Ayn Rand. I don't remember how I found it exactly, but I found that. And by the time I was 15, 16 years old, I had devoured all of Ayn Rand's stuff, including the newsletters, which I see over on the shelf there. We're only one of two people that have those, by the way. And she says, in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, you should read the Austrian economists, particularly Ludwig von Mises. And I did that when I was 16 years old. I had no idea what I was doing. I was probably an embarrassment to myself and to anyone that I was trying to explain these ideas to. But I became obsessed with this stuff. By accident, my dad got transferred to Grove City, Pennsylvania. My dad wanted me to go to college. I wasn't that interested in it, but Pops got what he wanted sometimes. That's how Pops are. And so I went to Grove City College as a biology major. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that what I was reading couldn't possibly translate into a career. So I said, I'm going to be a biology major. I thought I was the only one reading these strange books because you couldn't find them on bookshelves, and when I would talk to a friend about them, they would just look at me like I was a weirdo. By the way, a horrible way to meet girls in high school. Really bad strategy. But that actually gave me more time to read more books, because there was no getting dates if you were reading Mises in high school. So I went to Grove City College. I was miserable as a biology major because by this point I was reading Adam Smith and a lot of the classical liberals and a lot of the people that we in this room talk about all the time. And one night I got into a beer-fueled conversation about the proper role of government with a fraternity brother of mine, a guy named Peter Boettke. Peter Boettke is now the guy that runs the Buchanan Center at George Mason University, one of the brightest new generation of Austrian economists in the country. But at the time, we were just kids drinking beer. And by the way, I was the more principled position on limited government. He was kind of a statist back then. So, but we had this long argument. And he's like, "Why aren't you in the economics department?" I didn't know. I had no way of knowing. I had no way of discovering the fact that the chairman of the economics department at Grove City College had one of, I believe, 3 conferred PhD students of Ludwig von Mises running the economics department. Human Action was Econ 301 at Grove City College. It was about 100 yards away from where I lived. I didn't know it was there. Now, is it because I was a particularly uninformed kid? Maybe. But maybe the burden of knowing was so high, and finding the ideas and finding the people that shared those ideas, it was difficult back then. And I suddenly discovered to my delight that I wasn't the only person reading these books, and I immediately connected with not only other economics students at Grove City College, but Dr. Senholtz connected me to the Foundation for Economic Education, the Institute for Humane Studies, a number of places where after a while you discovered there might even be dozens, maybe even 100 of people that were thinking about these ideas of liberty. That was pretty cool. Of course, at the same time, Dr. Senholtz was mentoring a newish congressman named Ron Paul. Has anyone ever heard of Ron Paul? And I didn't know that either, but I think Ron Paul was going through that same journey. He was discovering particularly monetary policy and what Mises and Hayek and some of the other guys had done. The reason I tell that story is because today, if you discovered a used copy of Anthem, or you discovered an album dedicated to Ayn Rand, or you saw Ron Paul give a speech on YouTube, and you were curious, what would you do? You'd Google it. I tell the story in my book. Justin Amash, who I consider probably one of the smartest, most principled members of Congress today. He represents Grand Rapids, Michigan, not too far from here. He tells the story in my book about making it through high school, making it through college, making it through law school, without ever hearing about the ideas of liberty. Does that shock you even a little bit? So what did he do? He started looking at the two-party system. He looked at the Democrats in his area and said, you know, I'm definitely not one of those guys. They're so authoritarian. They want to tell us how to live our lives on everything. And he looked at the GOP establishment in his community and said, it doesn't seem quite right to me either. So what he did is he typed in some of the ideas that he was thinking about into Google, and up pops F.A. Hayek. And so he starts reading Hayek. And when you Google Hayek, you can see all of these the students and affiliated ideas. You can find places like Heartland almost immediately. And in a flash of a click, all of a sudden you've created your own curriculum. So what you learn in high school, what you learn in college, what you didn't learn in law school, you can self-educate. And that's exactly what he did. In Europe, there's an awesome group that's about 4 or 5 years old called European Students for Liberty. And it's affiliation of Students for Liberty here, and you guys probably know some of the local guys of that. And Alex McCoven, who runs Students for Liberty, would admit this when some activists in Europe said, I want to create a European base for liberty amongst young people. And Alex said, that's never going to work. I can tell you today, I've spoken to them in the last 3 years, every year the size of that group doubles in size. I happened to be there 2 years ago, and it happened to be the day after Rand Paul's filibuster. And it went on all night, and you guys probably know this data, but what was a joke at the beginning of Rand Paul's filibuster, the Beltway smart people were making fun of him. By the end of that 12 hours, Rand Paul, Stand with Rand, the idea that the president shouldn't have the arbitrary power to assassinate an American citizen on American soil without a trial, this was trending globally on Twitter, and ultimately forced Eric Holder to acknowledge that the president didn't have the right to do this. But what was interesting is when I was speaking to this group of about 300 young people, every one of them knew about that debate, which had just happened 24 hours earlier. Almost all of them had participated on Twitter. You think about this in the context of Hayek's notion of how knowledge is conveyed. He talks about the way that the market process is able to tap into the local knowledge of millions and millions of people with that own special understanding of their time and their place, their family, their community, their aspirations. Somehow, through the miracle of the market, all of these people with all of this personal knowledge come together in voluntary association and do something that none of us could have done alone. That is the awesomeness of America, right? That's what's so special about this place, is that there's very few limits on people coming together to solve problems and creating tremendous value, tremendous upward mobility. It's driven in large part by the struggle to understand what's going on. Austrians, unlike other economists, believe that we live in real time, in a sense that we don't know with any certainty what's going to happen in the next hour, or the next day, or the next week. Traditional economics assumes that you know those things. It's kind of a naive assumption, and it has impact on the way we think about the world. Think about that in the political marketplace. Think about that in the basic political literacy of busy citizens that are struggling to understand what Washington is up to, or Springfield, or the county council, or the school board. Whatever it is, it's always been a traditional and ubiquitous challenge for those of us that believe in liberty to know what they're up to behind the cloistered walls of government. And that's the way they like it. And they essentially they're information monopolists. They don't want you to know what they're doing. And typically, when you're really about to get screwed by a really bad piece of legislation, you wouldn't find out until after the deal is done. There's no way to fix the problem after the fact. This is what public choice economists call the dismal calculus of concentrated benefits and dispersed cost. The concentrated benefits go to those with a special interest or a special incentive to go ask for a favor. So maybe you're the CEO of General Electric, you get on your G5, you can't produce a product anymore, so you're going to fly to Washington and get a deal. And you got the juice to do that. You have the lobbyist, you have your man in Washington. The rest of us pay the price for that. So public choice economists have this fancy phrase, but let's be honest. All I'm saying is you get screwed. That's how politics works. You foot the bill for a bunch of people. Maybe it's public employees unions, maybe it's CEOs that can't sell a product, maybe it's sugar barons that know that you can't actually produce sugar to profit in the United States unless you get a special program in Washington. So you have this knowledge problem in politics, and you have this incentive problem in politics because the only people that show up are the bad guys. I worked on Capitol Hill once. I got my boss, helped him get on appropriations committee specifically to cut spending. This is back in the 1990s when Republicans were talking about cutting spending. Seems like a lifetime ago. Nobody came through his office doors asking him to cut spending. Nobody. Everybody came with a blue chip study, looked a little bit like this. And we almost had a joke about it in the office because they would run an econometric model that said for every government dollar spent on X, you get a threefold return. It didn't matter what it was. It could be sand renourishment on the beach, or highways, or you fill in the blank. And you know that there was a lot of lobbyists and a lot of smart people that would do that. So after a while, these guys that come to Washington to do the right thing, they inevitably start to realize that, well, maybe nobody actually wants me to cut spending. You certainly don't hear it inside the Beltway. So that's always been our dilemma, and those of us that believe in liberty, we've always been this almost guerrilla group of an organized minority trying to move public policy at the margin. Much like the Boston Tea Party, right? A carefully orchestrated event designed to galvanize an otherwise apathetic colonial public in the cause of liberty. And that used to be our model. The irony today is that Saul Alinsky and the radical left, they actually teach their young people the Boston Tea Party. They call it direct action. I would call it citizens showing up and holding government accountable. So here we are today with this tremendous opportunity. We used to be guerrilla warriors. We used to hope that we would find the occasional politician like Justin Amash that believed the right thing and would do the right thing no matter what the consequences, no matter how many people came into his office and insisted that he do the opposite. And once in a blue moon, you would find someone like that. But typically, politics would force even the best of us to conform to the old incentives of tax, spend, borrow, print, destroy the economy. Today, that's different. And this whole clash between the GOP establishment and the Tea Party, the Harry Reid and what he calls the anarchists. By the way, you're an anarchist if you believe we shouldn't spend money on a healthcare program that no one thinks works. That's anarchy. There may be another definition out there somewhere, but I think this is a tremendous opportunity. And the reason I wrote this book is I wanted, a lot of people were asking me, Matt, you say you're a libertarian. What is that? What's that word? I've heard it. It's sort of interesting. Ron Paul's talked about it. A lot of people are talking about libertarianism. I never used the word before. Joe, I don't know how much you used it, but because it used to be such an esoteric thing, you would almost scare people away. And we sort of pride ourselves in translating ideas into plain English. So I wanted in this book to translate the ideas of liberty into a few stories and a few principles that might connect with people who never thought about it before, but definitely are looking at the Democratic Party and say, I'm not one of those guys. Looking at the Republican Party and the bailouts and the spending and say, you know what, sometimes they say the right thing, but I'm not really one of those guys either. There's millions and millions of eyeballs looking for these ideas. Now, typically, we would say, well, read this and get back to us. And they would say, are you kidding? Or better yet, we wouldn't give them Man Economy Estate. We'd probably give them some 1,000-page tome translated from the original German with sentences that are about 2 paragraphs long. And you could do that. Or you could do something like this. Every activist I talk to, no matter where I go, is self-schooling on the ideas of liberty today. They started off as a protest movement. They learned how to get out the vote because they realized that that's what they needed to do. But right now, every one of them, and I bet you there's some people in this room that have this problem, you have a stack of these on the side of your bed, right? Who resembles this comment? Wait a minute, you guys have all read this, haven't you? What if we come up with more of this kind of thing? So I try to do that, particularly in the first chapter. And I sort of make fun of Saul Alinsky, and I guess you guys talked about this a little bit yesterday. But when we read Alinsky back in the 1980s, when we were trying to build a freedom-loving version of what the radical left had done, because we were reading Rothbard and we were trying to elect the right people, and we were producing 40-page white papers that very few people would read, while the left was on the streets. They were organizing, they were teaching people about the Boston Tea Party and said, this is how social change happens. So we started doing that. We read Saul Alinsky, When you go back and reread Saul Alinsky, you realize that the rules for radicals don't contain a single principle. He doesn't say what he's for. The rules for radicals are almost a cynical effort to manipulate people into doing something they wouldn't do otherwise. And you see that playing out in our politics today. Of course, our president, thank you guys for sending him to Washington. We really appreciate that. Of course, he was a student of Alinsky, so is Hillary Clinton. And you look at the way they conduct their business, the politics of personal attack and changing the subject, and literally trying to fool people into doing something they don't want to do, like buy health insurance you can't afford and don't need. This is what they are, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Saul Alinsky dedicates his book to Lucifer. If you want to have fun sometime, Google Alinsky and Lucifer and watch how the left freaks out trying to explain why he did that. Now, I would suggest that the reason he did it was because he was talking about manipulation. He was talking about ways that you could humiliate CEOs or create the perception of popular support for ideas that just don't work that well in America, where freedom is part of our genetic code. The rules for liberty are quite different, aren't they? First of all, I came up with 6, and I'm sure there's some really smart guy that's going to tell me that I forgot one. But I just sort of made that up because I'm like, if Alinsky can do 13, we can do it at least half that much. But what's interesting about our rules, and the way we talk about the rule of law over the rule of man, and we talk about the Constitution, and we use all this esoteric language to convince people what we care about, but what you're really talking about is treating everybody just like everybody else, and not choosing winners and losers, not caring who somebody's parents are, where they come from, what the color of their skin is. The rules for liberty treat everybody the same. Is that radical? Is that crazy? I don't think so. So I came up with 6, and obviously the title of my book reflects that. The title, by the way, came right after I finished reading Adam Smith's Theory of Moral Sentiments for the 2nd time, because I'm a masochist. and everybody should read it once, but if you don't want to read it, just read the cover of my book, because once you get through that 700 pages, what Adam Smith is really saying is don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. And those are essentially the rules that allow for civil society and voluntary cooperation. Rule number 1, don't hurt people. This shouldn't be that controversial, but I think some advocates of big government forget the fact that big governments, the experiments in human history, don't bode that well if you believe in big government. All of the isms, communism, fascism, radical dictators that use religion or some really well-meaning sounding thing ends up murdering millions of people. Is this an exception to the rule, or is this how it works when government gets too big? We're a little bit spoiled in this country because we don't see government that way, because we live in a country where government is limited. But talk to someone from Lithuania or the country of Georgia or someplace where they literally risked their lives and sometimes lost their lives defending the rights of individuals against the government. We need to understand that that's a real problem. Number 2, don't take people's stuff. I think everybody, if you were to do a poll, everybody would agree that you shouldn't steal from your neighbor. You shouldn't steal from your neighbor's bank. You probably shouldn't even steal your neighbor's identity online. But where we have an argument, a fundamental argument, is about whether or not you can outsource stealing to a third party. Is it okay to elect somebody to steal from him to give to you? And you don't know him and he doesn't know you, but somehow the person that pulled the lever for that politician is supposed to feel better about themselves. They solved a problem. They helped somebody. Well, the dirty thing about, the dirty secret about government stealing is it's never about transferring wealth from a rich person to a poor person. It's always about transferring wealth from politically unconnected people to the connected in Washington. And it might be a union boss, it might be a CEO. It's somebody, hat in hand, looking for a favor. That middleman skims all the cream off of the process. Creates a lot of poverty that's unintentioned as well. So I would argue, consistent with the founders, that there's no good government thievery or bad government thievery. There's only limited or unlimited thievery. Again, that's why we believe in the rules. That's why we believe in strictly limiting the functions of government based on the Constitution. Rule number 3, these start to get dicey, and this is the radical extremes of libertarianism. Take responsibility. The president in Rolling Stone magazine made fun of Ayn Rand just a little while ago. And by the way, he loves straw men. Have you ever noticed the way that he can just set them up and knock them down? And he retells a story that I heard Chris Matthews use the same argument against me in a debate once. Yeah, when I was 17 and feeling really bad about myself, I read Ayn Rand and she really appealed to that. But when you grow up, you realize that communities matter. Think about the straw man here. You can either have robust community and people helping each other out, or you can have respect for the individual. So I did a careful empirical study, which is strange for an Austrian. We don't do a lot of that stuff. But I actually went out into the field, went into a community, and it turns out that communities are made up of individuals. I didn't see that coming. And this idea that community is equivalent to government. Barney Frank once said, government is what we say when we decide to do things together. And when we're not doing things together, then we're these individualists doing anything to anybody to get where we want to go. Well, of course, that's a fundamental corruption of what a community is. Community is that process that Hayek talks about, how institutions and people solving problems cooperatively come together and help each other out. I view freedom not as a blank check to do whatever you want. Freedom is the responsibility when you look in the mirror every morning and say, did I solve that problem? If you didn't, who are you going to blame? Well, if you outsource it to government, you could blame them. But that tears community apart. That tears apart the social fabric that makes for the provision of the free society. I think we need to take the word community back from the left. They love to steal our words. They stole the word liberal. I don't know how to steal that one back, because they so trashed it. But I think we can save the word community, and we should do that. Rule number 4, another word we need to save. Work for it. Remember when Ashton Kutcher gave that speech to the Teen Choice Awards, and he said, and he was actually talking about Apple. Opportunity looks a lot like hard work. And every job I had was an opportunity, and every job that I had led to another job, and I never left a job because I always viewed them as an opportunity. Hollywood freaked out. Nancy Pelosi probably really freaked out because she's extolling the virtues of forced leisure under Obamacare. But I think we need to rehabilitate the word work. Work is not just the hassle of getting up every morning at 6 a.m. going to a job that you hate. Work is the opportunity, particularly if you're 18 or 21, to do something that no one has ever done before. My favorite economist, Ludwig von Mises, talks about the entrepreneur as that person that has that special judgment in real time, facing the radical ignorance of the future, to see around the corner of history and to imagine a solution that no one else imagines. And he talks about the way that everybody laughs at an entrepreneur. Remember how they laughed at Steve Jobs? They actually fired him, right? Because he'd gone too far. iPods? Nobody wants that stuff. That's what an entrepreneur is, and that's what is so special about America. When you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you get that first job, and that becomes an opportunity that you didn't imagine, and it allows you to define your own destiny. Let's take that back, particularly when the Democrats are arguing that unemployment is a virtue. We've got to fight that. Number 5, and this one could be controversial between libertarians and conservatives. Number 5 is mind your own business. And I talk about this, and this could obviously apply to what the NSA is doing when they violate our Fourth Amendment rights and and assume that you're guilty before you can prove your innocence and steal all your phone records because you might do something. It reminds me of that old Tom Cruise movie where they would arrest people because in the future they would do something wrong. Well, welcome to the future. But I talk about it in a different context. Being that strange young man that I was when I met the woman that would be my wife, we had a long conversation about why it was that I needed to get the federal government's approval for my most important relationship. And I was weird enough that I actually argued to my wife, we shouldn't get married because that would degrade our relationship. I don't need the government's approval to do this. That argument lasts about 5 seconds. And I tell that story because even libertarians respect a higher authority. But it turns out it's probably not a government bureaucrat.
It's the wife.
It could be my wife. It could be my grandmother. It could be social institutions that hundreds of years of voluntary cooperation has produced in a way that we know works, constrains bad behavior, promotes good behavior. I think today we get sideways when we have this debate about are you pro-gay marriage? Are you pro-government codifying gay marriage? Are you pro-government codifying traditional marriage? I think our position is government shouldn't have a position on marriage. Your church should, your synagogue should, your wife should, but I don't want the government involved. I think the government corrupts everything it touches, particularly things that are really important. Now that's controversial to some people, and during Q&A somebody can yell at me about that. So, and finally, and I'll end on this because I'd love to talk a little bit. The most important rule, as far as I'm concerned, is number 6: fight the power. And I think a lot of us that believe in liberty, we had various views on how we were going to change the world. Some of us hoped that good ideas would sort of rise to the top of the political process. Israel Kirzner, an economist that I respect, used to argue that. Because that's how it works in markets, right? In the free market, good ideas rise to the top because of customer demand and customer judgment. Politics produces the exact opposite outcome sometimes. And we thought that maybe we could just elect people that believed better things and had a stronger sense of morality and send them to Washington. Well, we know that power corrupts and Washington corrupts absolutely. So you got to go back and look at what the founders were talking about, and you can get this when you read George Washington's farewell address. He's very clear that the American experiment only survives if you and I show up. Government goes to those who show up. And if we don't show up, there's a vacuum. Somebody's going to do it for us. Somebody that wants something, somebody that wants a special deal. I think today that opportunity that I was talking about is there are millions and millions of people looking for the ideas in this book. They're not sure how to find them yet, but they're looking right now. So it's our extra responsibility, not just to show up, but to figure out how to help people that are looking for answers and connect them with other people, and then get out of the way and let free people organize in a way that we know works when it comes to producing a better widget. I'm going to argue it works even better when it comes to solving social problems, when it comes to imposing political discipline on bad actors in Washington. This is why I'm more optimistic today than I've been. I've been slogging away in the fields of liberty since I was a kid, but I think this should be our most exciting time. Even though the threats to liberty are so profound, we have an opportunity to do something that's never been done before, and I hope you join me in that fight. Thank you so much. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I was wondering, how do you reconcile the kind of behavior of young people, in that they live in a world of choice and freedom, and yet they also have a great kind of sympathy for paternalistic government, and how do you combat that? So
I would recommend first check out the new pretty comprehensive analysis by the Reason Foundation on this question. They do a polling project, and they just did a comprehensive look at millennials And I argue the same thing in my book without the benefit of having seen some of that data. I think young people are up for grabs. And I think a lot of the tendency towards the Democratic Party is a lack of a viable alternative. I mean, if I was 18 and I had a choice between John McCain and Barack Obama, where are you going to go? I mean, we keep running Bob Dole thinking that somehow he's going to galvanize young people. But I think they're up for grabs, and I think it's unfair to young people to argue that they like community. They believe in doing the right thing, and now they probably have a lot of buyer's remorse, particularly after Obamacare, the way that it forces young, poor, healthy people to subsidize big insurance companies. The abuse of our civil liberties through the NSA and the Obama administration. And if you happen to be burned out on war, this is a wartime president. This is a president that was going to skip going to Congress to bomb Syria, when in fact he had always argued the opposite. I think we should exploit that, but you can't beat something with nothing. If you want to go to the political marketplace, I think we need an alternative to insanely authoritarian big government progressivism. They've taken over the Democratic Party. The question is, what's that alternative? And I think we're in the process of trying to restore some of the values that have occasionally taken root in the Republican Party. I guess you guys quoted this yesterday, but you know the famous Ronald Reagan quote from 1975 when he said that the heart and soul of conservatism is libertarian. Remember what he did the next year? In 1976, he primaried a sitting Republican president, and the GOP establishment went completely bananas. You're destroying the party. We'll go the way of the Whigs. Well, he was just hosing out the barn, right? And he restored the Republican Party and created what in my lifetime has been a new Republican Party, by and large, that has had political success that it didn't have before Reagan. That's a long answer. I apologize for that. Yes, sir.
Speaking of the NSA, what's your take on Edward Snowden? Do you see him as a hero, traitor, both?
We don't know yet, do we? No. I think he might be a dissident, but I don't know enough to side with him or against him. I generally like transparency. I generally like the accountability that comes with that, and in that sense, I respect him. But I think, going back to the Alinsky point, what this administration has tried to do, instead of addressing the question of whether or not they were abusing the Fourth and Fifth Amendments of the Constitution, which I believe the answer is yes, they started trashing Edward Snowden personally. It's not about Edward Snowden. It's about the question of whether or not the NSA has the constitutional authority to do the things that it does. So that's where I fall on it, but we'll see. We'll find out eventually. Maybe. Maybe we never will. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we're kind of talking about Washington. But we got a lot of levels of government. We've got the state, and we got the county, and we got the local. But we've also got a world economy that we're dealing with now. And if we look at America for the last 250 years, we've never had two states, other than the Civil War, fighting each other. And we've got a world now where we've got countries fighting each other, and America is made up of just about every nationality that we've got. So we can say that America is a country of the people of the world. And so we also have to look at, in our lines of government, that we need that world government. We do need that UN, but the UN is virtually invisible right now.
You've exceeded my level of expertise, so I'm not going to make up something to make you think I'm smart. But I would say this, and I would observe there's a robust debate about the Ukraine and Russia and what Putin is doing. I would just observe, looking at the climate change conference there, Eastern Europe and the United States has unilaterally disarmed itself when it comes to energy. And the control that Putin has over former Soviet satellites and frankly, Western Europe, it's all about oil. And Adam Smith said it best: when goods don't cross borders, troops do. So I think as people that believe in economic freedom, instead of looking for a UN solution or a military solution, we should look at what freedom could do to liberate people who are captured by these things. Because energy matters. Being able to heat your home in Georgia matters. And we've unilaterally disarmed good people.
I already asked you the sideburn question, so I won't ask that again. You can ask them later. When you Google them, it comes up sideburn. But back to...
Those are paid Google ads, by the way.
Back to, I asked you before if I'm a Republican, a Tea Party, conservative, Libertarian, what am I? So I basically say the same thing. I'm for limited government, less spending, less borrowing, less taxes. We need to limit the size, scope, and cost of government.
Yeah.
So my position's being demonized as a Tea Party person.
Right.
What do you think we can do to, and we talked about this yesterday, should we be attacking, Joe has a whole list of places we shouldn't shop at, including Coca-Cola. Should we be attacking them, or should we just keep the higher ground and be polite conservatives? Or what, and I'm specifically saying, I'll finish the question with this, like Sarah Palin was completely demonized. What can we do to avoid this?
And by the way, if you Google a little bit deeper, you'll see that more than a few people have demonized me, and probably a lot of people in this room have been called names or somehow smeared by a political establishment that's scared to death that you're going to replace them with somebody else. And that's the bottom line. Referring to Alinsky, and you can look at a lot of these Republican primaries right now, where the so-called Tea Party guy is running against an incumbent or an establishment favorite. Almost without exception, our candidates run on issues and values and things that really matter to people. Almost without exception, their candidates smear their opponent. And you saw this play out in North Carolina recently. Greg Brennan versus Tom Tillis. It happened also in Nebraska yesterday. I think the good guy survived that one. It happened to Ted Cruz. Do you remember the millions of dollars of ads that David Dewhurst ran calling Ted Cruz literally a Chinese communist? I'm not making that up. Apparently it wasn't credible, which is good news. I would suggest that we stick to our rules and continue to convey those values and principles and solutions that we represent. Because even though the Tea Party brand has taken a beating, and it has, Sarah Palin's taken a beating, fill in the blank, we've all kind of taken a beating, but it's not about us. It's about the ideas, and the ideas are trending exactly in the right direction with the American people. If we stop doing what we're doing and start calling the other guys names, we're going to miss that market share of independent voters that really don't care about any of that stuff. They're looking for a solution. They're looking for an alternative to big government. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, do you think Rand Paul has hurt his chances for presidential runs since he softened his stance on immigration and the voter ID?
No. And I'm curious. Someone was asking about the voter ID thing, and I think the question that I would ask him, acknowledging the history, I talk about this in my book and compare Rand's filibuster to Strom Thurmond's. It used to be the case that Republicans and Democrats alike would game the rules of voting so that black people couldn't get to the polls. He's acknowledging a history that actually existed, and I think a lot of, regardless of the party that you're in, the party in power tries to game the system to hurt the constituents of the other party. And what we believe in is that everybody should get a chance to vote, but people shouldn't be allowed to vote twice. You shouldn't be allowed to vote if you're dead. You shouldn't be allowed to vote if you're not a citizen. And if Rand Paul comes up with the answer to that, I'll agree with him wholeheartedly. So I think the comment was more an acknowledgement of where he was. And I'll finish with this about Rand Paul. I think he's an interesting guy because the speech he gave, and by the way, I'm a little bit biased because FreedomWorks has joined his lawsuit against the NSA and the president. He gave that speech at CPAC where he talked about challenging the military-industrial complex. He didn't use that word. He was quoting Pink Floyd instead, which was kind of cool. He gave the same speech at Berkeley a week later, and he got exactly the same standing ovation from both crowds. I think he's trying to tap into a new constituency, and I applaud him for that. Any candidate for president is going to make a lot of mistakes, and the real test is whether or not they survive putting their own foot in their mouth, because they will. We all would, with that light on us all the time. Okay, anybody else? One more.
Okay, healthcare.
I'm against Obamacare.
I am too. You know, I think it's upside down, backwards, inside out. But you mentioned before in your conversation here about we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow to ourselves. So if a young person were to buy insurance for, health insurance, he doesn't know what's going to happen to him later. We all know we're going to die. So
Really?
So if I'm still around, but we're all in the same boat. Mm-hmm. So if we're all in the same boat, then why don't we all get together and form our own insurance company so that we're paying into the big pool and make sure that if we happen to get old, we got the insurance. If we die, well, it's like we don't want to use our insurance, is what I'm really saying.
Right.
Nobody wants to use their insurance. They don't want their house to burn down. They don't want their car to get in an accident. You carry a spare tire, you hope you never have to use it. So for somebody to have to try and select which policy do I need, let's face it, it's the cheapest.
The answer is in this book. And I'm not making that up, I'm serious. And the challenge for those of us that oppose Obamacare is explaining how choice and patients working with doctors and defining their own future would actually work in practice. The answer for young people is pretty easy. You're young, you're healthy, you don't have much money. The risk of you facing a catastrophic illness is very low. It's still there. You might get hit by a bus. That's why they should choose low-cost catastrophic plans with high deductibles. What Obamacare does to them is the exact opposite of that. They are forced to buy these gold-plated plans that cover all sorts of things. I'm now covered for birth control. I'm pretty excited about that. And all sorts of other crazy things, because the insurance company said, if you're going to force us to cover everybody, regardless of whether or not they were responsible, I'm going to make you really bilk young people. Freedom, the alternative, is a great sell. It's based on choice. It's based on opportunity. It's based on actually being able to take care of yourself. And we need, that's job number one. I guarantee in this election, that's what we need to talk about most. Because they're going to, Barack Obama's going to say, if you're against Common Core, you're against educating children. If you're against Obamacare, you're pro people dying in the streets. I don't think that's true, but we haven't explained how we would fix a very corrupted, complicated healthcare system, created, by the way, by government rules that really destroyed it. Thank you, guys.
Well, tell you what, though, I think we do have a few other questions.
Okay.
And I'm curious about the elections in 2014, and maybe as background to that, in 2010 we had a terrific election year, a historic realignment. In 2012, it seems we fell on our face, and the Tea Party movement was nowhere to be seen. And efforts by groups like yours and Americans for Prosperity didn't seem to make much difference. What are you going to do differently this year to try to get the results that we saw in 2010 instead of the results that we got in 2012?
That's a great question. First of all, in 2010, by and large, because of the grassroots, Republican candidates ran on issues. And there was this effort, there was this crowdsourced effort, the Contract from America, that solicited thousands of ideas on what we wanted candidates to run on. It was winnowed down to the top 10. FreedomWorks supported the activists trying to do this. And as a result, virtually every Republican had 10 principles that they were running on that I guarantee you will find in my book. You'll find in virtually everything Heartland puts out. In 2012, two things happened. And I've been pretty tough on Mitt Romney because I think for one thing, and there were others, but one thing he did that really killed us is he took health care off the table. He's the architect of Romney Care, which the president loved to point out was the basis of Obamacare. And he refused to talk about health care in an election where that was a defining issue, had been a defining issue in 2010. Now the other thing that went on, so the top of the ticket was a problem for us. And in presidential years, when more people show up, the strength of the top of the ticket is, I was kind of hoping it wouldn't matter, and we tried to work around it, but it didn't work out that well. The other thing that happened, and American Enterprise Institute has a great study on this, was Lois Lerner and the targeting of Tea Party groups that had been the spontaneous de facto get-out-the-vote machine in 2010. Go look at where they targeted. They just happened to spend a lot of time in Ohio and Florida, and I'm sure it was the weather. I'm certain it wasn't political expediency, but AEI estimates that cost us somewhere between 5.5 and 8 million votes. Think about what we could have done with an extra 5 million votes, particularly in battleground states. You might have won the Senate, you might have won the presidency, you certainly would have had better results. The IRS just tried to codify those rules, and in a historic surge of comments from taxpayers actually pushed that back until after the 2014 election. A great example of how accountability can actually work even when the IRS has such monopoly powers. The data I've seen about 2014 says the opportunity is all ours. But I don't think Republicans win by running on nothing. This isn't a beauty contest, particularly if, I hate to pick on John McCain all the time, but if you're John McCain, you're not going to win because you're beautiful. You should run on ideas. So people have a lot of buyer's remorse for Democrats. It's an off-year election, so turnout's going to be lower. Our guys are really fired up. There's 5 million newly mobilized voters who lost the insurance they were promised they could keep. And this is when I get really nervous because we shouldn't be able to screw this up, but we might. So that's why everybody in this room, if you care about this, you got to get involved.
Instead of just appealing to people's rational ideas and principles, sometimes I think that we need to appeal to some of their emotional kinds of things too, to make them excited about what's going to happen. Every time you turn on the radio, you hear how bad Republicans are. I mean, every 30 minutes you hear it if you listen to the local stations.
Yeah. And that's going to continue.
And maybe we ought to offer free phones for your votes.
Emotional appeals don't come easy to libertarians.
No, they don't.
We talked about this yesterday.
Yeah.
You've got to get around it somehow.
I
You
agree.
can't say we're taking away your telephones, but vote for us.
Yeah.
It
I do think we all work a lot on connecting emotionally, and it's sort of like rehabilitation for economists. But I think the other thing that encourages me, we all worry about the New York Times and the 3 TV networks telling us that anybody that believes in freedom is some kind of a monster. The good news is the New York Times and the 3 networks don't matter nearly as much as they used to. And bloggers in basements and Twitter queens and citizen journalists have much more power than they used to, and that trend's just going to continue. But the establishment media is going to circle the wagons, and they're going to vilify us, if history is any example. But I would suggest we work around it, and we also have a responsibility to not put our foots in our mouths to the best we can. You still had a question?
I was going to add a comment to what she said, is that she's absolutely correct in that somehow messaging has to change, because when I was out helping to canvass for Republican in the primaries for candidates, the first question I got asked by people that asked me to sign the petition was, are they Democrat or Republican? I'd say Republican, and the first response I got was, oh, they want to take away my link card.
Yeah.
So somehow that messaging has to, that's got to be key. Stick with the issue, stick with logic, but you also have to figure out a way to weave or meld that into people's emotion, because people do care about liberty. It's how you fashion the argument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sometimes it's the words we use.
One more question, Jim Johnston, we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
Yes.
The thing that I detect is kind of new is the attack on business people on the part of the Department of the Attorney General of the United States, and also groups that will target donors to people like the Heartland Institute and try and shoo away their customers, or at least intimidate the business people. And we don't have the heroes of Ayn Rand's novels to stand up anymore, with the exception of Mark Cuban, by the way. He's notable in that regard. But it seems to me that you talk about transparency, and I think what you're implying is it's transparency in the part of government. We don't want to have transparency of our own individual lives and who we make contributions to. And also, the legal process is so expensive to defend yourself against these things that it's really stacked against people.
I mean, I agree 100%, and obviously individual privacy is fundamental. When I talk about transparency, I'm talking about transparency in government. By the way, the left has invaded the shareholder meetings, and they've imposed a level of transparency on corporations that I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's a fact of life now, and they use it to intimidate boards of directors. I think the alternative would be for our side to build a constituency that's actually willing to defend corporations when they do the right thing, but also willing to do the same thing. We got plenty of bad acting corporations in this country, and I'm afraid the trend is towards more crony capitalism and less responsible wealth creation. We actually go into shareholder meetings now. We work with a gentleman named Tom Borelli. Some of you guys probably see Deneen on Fox News. They go to shareholder meetings and they offer initiatives as well, you know, sometimes against, I guess they went after Apple for being all in on global warming, as if Apple shareholders had a stake in climate change regulation. But I think the answer to every problem we could bring up today is build a community. And you saw this with Mackey. What's his first name? John Mackey. You remember he wrote that piece against Obamacare in the Wall Street Journal, and the left boycotted Whole Foods. And the Tea Party responded with a boycott. And I think for all the rules and transparency and all these things we could do on the inside, the best thing we could do is create a constituency that will show up when people do the right thing in business, and also show up and hold them accountable when they do the wrong thing. And the same is true in politics, same is true in public opinion, same is true in ideas. Everything we should try to do today is building and supporting and growing that community of people that believe in liberty and have the tools to act when something happens.
Last one, sir.
You mentioned crony capitalism, and I think a lot of liberals unfortunately think of capitalism as crony capitalism. Is there a way to separate cronyism, like crony socialism, from capitalism?
Yeah, and you know, I call it, we're struggling, we need a phrase that rolls off the tongue like crony capitalism.
Crony socialism.
I don't know if that works either, but it's insiders, right?
Yeah.
let's agree to figure that one out, because we have to. Because right now, if I'm giving an interview, I slip back into saying crony capitalism, and it probably gives honest, decent capitalists a bad name. Thank you all. Appreciate it.